Desert Requiem. The desert tasted of dust, and dread. Three figures knelt before El Vibora, their silhouettes elongated and distorted by the sinking sun, fettered at the wrists. Their faces were a collage of bruises, eyes swollen shut at a buzzing halo of flies. A morbid cantata surrounded their injuries, their silent pleas lost to the wind. That El Vibora's snakeskin boots crunched on the gravelly ground as he circled them. He stroked the cold gleam of his pistol, chrome winking like a carrion bird's beak. His gaze lingered on his men, a silent audience of a dozen, their faces masks of impassivity. This lesson needed to be etched into their minds. Weakness was a creeping poison. "You know why you're here?" El Vibora's voice, a gritty whisper that carried on the still air, demanded. He didn't pause for a response. He never did. "You stole from me, from Los Scorpions. You thought you could line your pockets with our coin." One of the condemned, barely a man, his youth betrayed by a trembling chin, choked back a sob. "Please, Senor. I needed the money. My mother is gravely ill." El Vibora halted his circuit. That he crouched, his face close enough to taste the young man's fear. The space between them thrummed with menace. "Your mother? Do you think I give a damn about your mother? Loyalty is the only currency that matters. Family is a weakness, power is everything." He seized the young man's jaw, forcing his gaze upward. "Look at me. Do you see any leniency in my eyes?" Terror widened the young man's eyes, now brimming with tears. He shook his head. A barely perceptible tremor, a chilling smile stretched El Vibora's lips, a predatory flourish that didn't touch his eyes. "Good. Because there is none." He released his grip, stood, and addressed his lieutenant, Marco. "The tools?" Marco nodded, and two men advanced, each hefting a shovel. They were tossed towards the kneeling prisoners, landing with a muted clang against the baked earth. "Dig," El Vibora commanded, his voice flat. "Excavate your own tombs." They stared at the implements of their demise, disbelief warring with stark despair. Hesitation flickered. Then the primal urge to survive spurred them into action. Shovels bit into the unyielding ground, the scraping sound amplified in the desert's quietude. Sweat slicked their skin, mingling with blood and grime. El Vibora watched, his expression an impenetrable shield. He reveled in this spectacle. The terror, the desperation, the raw, instinctual fight for survival. It was a potent reminder of his dominion, his absolute control. As the holes deepened, the sun slipped further below the horizon, staining the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery crimson. A cool draft swept across the land, a sharp contrast to the day's scorching breath. The shadows elongated, contorting the men's figures into grotesque parodies of themselves. When the excavations were deemed sufficient, El Vibora flicked his wrist point. Two of his enforcers hauled the young man towards his assigned pit, forcing him to kneel. At its edge, a piercing scream erupted from his throat, a frantic plea that was swallowed by the desert's vast indifference. El Vibora strolled over, his boots grinding on the gravel. He stood behind the terrified youth, pistol raised. "Any parting words?" he inquired, his tone almost conversational. The scream continued, a high-pitched wail of utter despair. El Vibora sighed, a sound of theatrical weariness. "As you wish." He pressed the barrel of the pistol against the nape of the young man's neck. The shot detonated, a sharp, deafening report that extinguished the screams. The body crumpled forward, collapsing into the crude grave, limbs twitching in final spasms. The remaining two watched, their faces the color of bleached bone. Their fate was sealed. One by one, El Vibora administered his final judgment. Each shot was clinical, efficient, devoid of any emotion, and no flinching, no hesitation, just the cold execution of his self-imposed sentence, his face a chilling blank. When it was done, silence reclaimed the desert. Only the sighing of the wind remained. Three corpses lay in shallow earth, their blood seeping into the parched sand. El Vibora holstered his weapon and scanned the heavens. Vultures circled high above, their silhouettes stark against the dying light. They recognized this place, knew its purpose. A graveyard that he addressed Marco. "Bury them." Marco nodded, gesturing to the others. They began to fill the holes, entombing their former comrades in the unforgiving earth. Elva Bora observed them for a moment, then turned and strode towards his pickup that he slid inside, ignited the engine, and abandoned the desert and its morbid secrets in the rearview mirror. He saw the vultures descending, their shadows growing larger as they spiraled lower. He felt nothing. Let them feast. He had delivered a message, a chilling decree that would reverberate through the ranks of Losa scorpions. Betrayal is a death warrant, disloyalty is met with swift, brutal retribution, and Elva Bora reigns supreme. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles bone-white. He had to maintain control. Eliminate any threat, real or perceived. Weakness was a luxury he could not afford. Not now. Never. The desert unfolded before him, a vast, implacable expanse. It was a fitting stage for his tyranny. A theater, where life held little value and death lurked around every bend. Only the strong survived, and Elva Bora was determined to be the apex predator. He would crush any opposition, silence any dissent. He would rule Losa scorpions with an iron will. Darkness had completely enveloped the land. Only the truck's headlights sliced through the night, twin beams illuminating the gravel track. He drove onward, plunging deeper into the abyss, his heart a crucible of cold ambition. The desert wind howled around him, carrying the whispers of the departed. But Elva Bora was deaf to their mournful cries. His focus fixed on the future, on his schemes, on his relentless pursuit of dominion. The dead were gone that he lived, and that was the only truth that mattered, the accountant's nightmare. Chuck bolted upright, sheets twisted around him like grave clothes. His pulse thundered a frantic rhythm against the echo of the bad dream visions flickered behind his closed eyes. Crimson blossoming on faded flooring, a low, bestial growl from a man built like a brick wall, the sickening snap of something breaking. He swiped at the damp hair clinging to his brow, but the pre-dawn air offered scant relief from the internal heat. The digital numerals on the clock glowed. 5:47. Premature. But sleep was a forfeited privilege, not while specters clawed at the periphery of his awareness. He swung his legs over the edge, the floorboards emitting a doleful groan. A quick, scalding shower offered a momentary respite from the pervasive chill. Donning the anonymous attire of his current existence, chinos, a light blue Oxford shirt, unremarkable shoes. He met his gaze in the mirror. Charles Harrison. That was the name, the persona that no longer Charlie. A ghost of the man he'd been. Simply Chuck, the Bean. Counter, he attempted a smile, but it felt artificial, a mask. The lines fanning from his eyes whispered a different narrative, one of brutality and remorse. He rubbed at them. A futile gesture to erase the indelible ink of the past. The drive to Klein & Sons was a study in suburban sameness. Cookie-cutter houses fronted emerald lawns. SUVs shuttled kids toward the school bell, and the aroma of freshly mown grass hung heavy. Chuck felt like an outsider observing this mundane tableau, a specter, haunting a borrowed life. Above, the office fluorescence hummed, bathing the rows of workstations in a sterile light. He negotiated the cubicle farm, offering curt nods to colleagues, each interaction a carefully choreographed act. He was the quiet, reliable guy who brought donuts on Fridays. None suspected the darkness he kept leashed within. He sank into his cubicle, the flimsy partitions offering scant refuge. The computer flickered to life, the predictable routine a small anchor. Spreadsheets swam into view, numbers dissolving into meaningless abstraction. He struggled to concentrate, to immerse himself in the minutiae of taxation and ledgers, but his thoughts kept circling back. His gaze drifted out the window. Unfocused heat waves shimmered above the blacktop of the parking lot. A phantom image surfaced. The sticky floor of the dive bar, the reek of stale beer and sweat, the roar of the crowd. Back then, he'd been younger, driven by recklessness, fueled by adrenaline and misguided loyalty. A trivial dispute over a pool game had erupted into chaos. A swirling vortex of fists and shattered glass. He'd held his own, until the behemoth, a mountain of muscle and menace, had ambushed him. He recalled the white-hot pain, the metallic tang of blood, the encroaching darkness that he registered. As if from a distance, being hauled from the bar, discarded in a filthy alley, he recalled the biting cold, the gut-wrenching dread, the sense of his lifeblood draining away. Then, another memory, softer, warmer in tone. The muted light of a small dispensary, the sharp scent of antiseptic and medicinal herbs at a woman's face, framed by raven hair, her eyes brimming with compassion, Elena. Her touch, both gentle and sure, stitching the ragged gash in his side. "You're fortunate," she'd stated, her voice calm but resolute. "An inch closer and you wouldn't be here." He was eternally in her debt. She had snatched him from the brink, gifted him a second existence. He had attempted to express his gratitude, to repay her generosity, but she had refused. "Just live well," she'd urged. "That's all the payment I need." He shut his eyes, her visage etched onto the back of his lids. He had striven to live well, to honor her gift. He had buried Charlie deep beneath the surface, attempted to reinvent himself, to become someone worthy of the reprieve he'd been granted. Yet the past clung to him, a constant reminder of the obligation he could never truly settle. The jangling of the phone shattered his reverie. Mr. Klein was calling him to his office. He inhaled deeply, straightened his tie, and walked toward the corner office, carrying the weight of his history. Whatever Klein wanted, it couldn't eclipse the horrors awaiting him each night. That he prayed that was the case. At least. A flicker of hope, a surge of dread. The television droned, a dull counterpoint to the profound quiet within Chuck's apartment. He'd left it blaring, a futile barricade against the encroaching loneliness that always threatened to swallow him whole. On the screen, a frantic reporter stood amidst carnage. Vehicles overturned like toys, smoke staining the heavens the color of a fading bruise, combatants barking orders in rapid-fire Spanish. Escalation of cartel violence continues unabated. Authorities struggle to regain control as rival factions battle for supremacy. Chuck listlessly swirled his instant coffee, its tinny edge failing to quell the bitter aftertaste of dread. The journalist's words barely registered. His thoughts were already ensnared in a web of figures and projections. Then, the camera pulled back, revealing the full scope of the devastation. For a split second, nearly lost in the billowing haze, a small building flickered into view. Above its entrance, a time-worn sign proclaimed, "Clínica Esperanza. Hope Clinic." Chuck's blood ran cold. The spoon clattered against the mug's rim. A gasp escaped him. Hope Clinic? Impossible. He lunged for the remote, fingers clumsy as he rewound the footage. He replayed it, meticulously, his gaze laser-focused. There. Again. A fleeting glimpse, yet unmistakable. The sun-baked brick, the mismatched roof tiles, the scraggly patch of cacti clinging to life out front. Elena's sanctuary. A wave of sickness rose in his throat. His skin slick with a clammy film. He knew that. Clinic. He knew the sharp scent of disinfectant mingled with the comforting aroma of wood smoke that always permeated Elena's garments. He knew how sunlight, filtered through grime-coated windows, gilded the dog-eared pages of her medical texts. He knew the comforting cadence of her heartbeat as she listened to his chest, seeking proof of life. Perhaps his heart hammered a frantic tattoo against his ribs, an echo of the growing alarm in his mind. He'd banished Elena from his thoughts for years, dared not dwell on her. The guilt was a constant shadow, a dull throb he'd learned to live with, but witnessing the clinic, seeing it caught in the vortex of a brutal war, it tore open old scars, unleashing a flood of memories and a wave of suffocating fear. He slammed the remote on the table, his knuckles bone-white. He needed answers. He wrestled his laptop onto the cramped table, the cheap plastic groaning in protest. He typed, "Clínica Esperanza, Mexico," into the search field, his fingers trembling uncontrollably. The results were a chaotic jumble of travel snippets, obsolete directories, and regional news bulletins. He scrolled with feverish intensity, discarding irrelevant hits, searching for any mention of Elena. At last, he found it. A rudimentary Facebook page for the clinic, sparsely populated. The most recent post, from 3 months prior, showed Elena smiling alongside a throng of children, their faces radiating health and joy. Silver now threaded her hair, and laugh lines etched themselves around her eyes, yet her smile remained unchanged, welcoming, authentic. The smile that had once been his salvation. He clicked her name, hoping for a personal profile, a means of reaching her. But her profile was locked, private. He scrolled through the clinic's photos, his anxiety ratcheting up with each image. Pictures of patients, volunteers, community gatherings. A life dedicated to service. A life he had nearly obliterated. Then he saw it at a news item shared on the page. The headline screamed, "Cartel violence erupts near Clinica Esperanza. Doctors and patients feared victims." The article offered scant details, but the accompanying image depicted the clinic, or what remained of it. The facade was pockmarked with bullet holes, the windows shattered, the sign hanging by a thread. Chuck shut the laptop. His hands shaking violently as he rose to his feet, pacing the confined space. His thoughts spiraling. He had struggled to bury Charlie, to become Chuck, the meticulous accountant that he had constructed a life of placid routine, of precise order, of calculated anonymity. He deluded himself into believing he could outrun his past, that he could expiate his crimes simply by existing. But the past refused to remain buried. It clawed its way to the surface, dragging him back into the very maelstrom he had desperately tried to escape. Elena was in harm's way. The woman who had rescued him, the woman who had shown him grace when he deserved only condemnation, was now embroiled in a conflict he understood intimately. He stared at his reflection in the television's dark screen. The face that stared back was ashen, gaunt, haunted, yet beyond the fear, eclipsing the guilt, he detected something else, a spark of something long suppressed, a steely resolve. Chuck was gone. Charlie was stirring. And he knew what he had to do. Ghosts of Spectre. The glow of the monitor illuminated Chuck's face, highlighting the stark lines etched by worry and a long-dormant resolve. Gone was the soft, almost apologetic Charlie Harrison now. The ghost of Spectre was emerging from its carefully constructed tomb. He devoured online articles about cartel tactics, memorizing their preferred weapons, their convoy formations, their known safe houses in Nuevo Laredo. He sought out open-source intelligence, satellite imagery, anything that could give him an edge. Each click, each downloaded file, was a step further away from the life he'd built and a step closer to the abyss he'd tried so hard to forget. He closed the laptop with a snap, the sudden silence amplifying the pounding in his ears. The research was grim, painting a picture of ruthless efficiency and brutal power. But fear wasn't an option. Fear had kept him hidden for too long. He pushed back from the desk and descended the narrow stairs to his garage. The space was cluttered with the detritus of suburban life. A lawnmower, a half-finished woodworking project, boxes of Christmas decorations. But tucked away in the back, behind a stack of old tires, was a worn-out heavy bag. Chuck stripped off his flannel shirt, revealing the lean muscle he'd painstakingly maintained over the years. He began to move. His fists a blur against the canvas, years of carefully suppressed training resurfaced, each strike precise, each movement economical. He wasn't just hitting the bag. He was dismantling an enemy, piece by piece, in his mind. The air filled with the rhythmic thud of leather on canvas, the only sound in the quiet suburban night besides Chuck's ragged breaths. He visualized faces from the news report, the cold, indifferent eyes of the cartel members. Elena's face flashed before him, a beacon of kindness amidst the chaos. That image fueled his rage, channeled his movements. Each punch carried the weight of his guilt, his desperate need to atone for the years he'd spent running. Hours later, sweat plastered his hair to his forehead. His knuckles raw and bleeding, he stopped, chest heaving, and stared at the battered bag, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He wasn't Charlie anymore. He was something else, something harder, something necessary. He moved to the workbench, running his hand along its smooth surface, that he knew this house like the back of his hand, that he'd chosen it specifically for its unremarkable facade and its hidden potential. He pressed a seemingly random sequence of knots. On the wooden surface, a section of the wall slid inward, revealing a narrow, concealed space. Inside, nestled amongst layers of protective foam, were the tools of a life he thought he'd left behind: a disassembled Glock 19, meticulously cleaned and oiled, stacks of high-denomination U.S. currency, vacuum-sealed and ready for use, a passport under a different name, a name he hadn't used in years, and beneath it all, a worn leather-bound journal, its pages filled with cryptic notes and tactical diagrams. He carefully removed the Glock, his fingers tracing the familiar contours of the weapon. It felt like an extension of his own hand. A tool he knew intimately, he assembled it with practiced ease, the metallic click echoing in the confined space. Next, he retrieved a smaller, metal box. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, lay a dog tag. Spectre, the call sign he had earned, the name that haunted him. Still, he held it in his palm for a long moment, the cold metal a stark reminder of the man he once was. He closed the box, a silent promise to wear the name with purpose, this time. Upstairs, he moved through the house, a ghost in his own life. He paused in the living room, looking at the framed photos on the mantelpiece. Charlie at a company picnic, Charlie at a bowling alley, Charlie smiling awkwardly next to a Christmas tree. Those photos were a lie, a carefully constructed illusion. He took them down, placing them carefully in a box that he wouldn't destroy them. That life, that attempt at normalcy, deserved respect, even if it wasn't real. He stood in the doorway of his bedroom, a room that had once felt like a sanctuary. Now, it felt like a prison. He picked up a worn paperback, a collection of poetry he'd been pretending to enjoy. He placed it on the nightstand. A final act of farewell to the man he was leaving behind. He walked out of the house, the darkness swallowing him whole. He didn't look back. Charlie Harrison was dead. Spectre was going home, crossing the line. The desert wind tasted of dust and desperation as Chuck, now only Spectre, bounced along a rutted dirt track, the skeletal remains of Joshua trees clawing at the twilight sky. He'd bypassed the official border crossings hours ago, trusting in the well-worn smuggler routes etched into the land like wrinkles on an old man's face. His aging Ford pickup, a relic from his Charlie Harrison days, strained against the uneven terrain, each jolt a reminder of the life he was leaving behind, pulverized to dust in his wake. He'd killed the headlights an hour back, relying on the sliver of moon and his own night-honed vision. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of mesquite and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid that pricked at his nostrils. Fear. Probably his own. He hadn't felt this way in a long time. A pair of headlights, twin predatory eyes, appeared in his rearview mirror, growing rapidly. Spectre killed the engine. Plunging himself into absolute darkness, he slid low in the seat, his hand instinctively reaching for the Colt Python nestled under the seat. The approaching vehicle slowed, its engine rumbling like a caged beast. He caught a glimpse of it, a blacked-out Suburban, riding high, its windows tinted like obsidian, the kind of vehicle that whispered of power and impunity. They idled there, 20 yards behind him. For an agonizing minute Spectre held his breath, every muscle coiled tight. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the Suburban accelerated, its taillights disappearing over the crest of a distant hill. Spectre let out a slow, shaky breath. A warning? A reconnaissance run. He couldn't be sure. He restarted the engine, his senses on high alert, and continued his trek south. The cantina, El Polvo, was a crumbling adobe structure that looked like it might collapse under the weight of a strong sneeze. A single, flickering neon sign buzzed fitfully above the door, casting a lurid glow on the dusty street. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke, the murmur of hushed conversations, and the cloying sweetness of cheap tequila. His contact, a wiry man named Reyes with a face like a roadmap of hard living, sat hunched in a darkened corner booth. Reyes didn't offer a greeting, only a curt nod towards the opposite seat. You took your time, gringo, Reyes rasped, his voice raspy from too many cigarettes. Had some company on the road? Spectre replied, his voice low. Reyes chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. This is that kind of country now. Everyone has company. He gestured to a bottle of tequila on the table. You drink. Spectre shook his head. Information first. Reyes shrugged. The woman, Elena, the one you're looking for. She was taken by Los Scorpions. Spectre's jaw tightened. Los Scorpions, he knew of them. A relatively new player, even more brutal than the old guard. Their territory was expanding, their methods savage. Why? That is the expensive part. Amigo, Reyes said. His eyes glinting in the dim light, he took a long swig of tequila. Rumor is, she knew something. Something about their operations. Or maybe someone thought she did. What operations? Reyes hesitated, glancing around the cantina. They are moving product, a lot of it, through the old mining tunnels east of here. And they're not just moving drugs. They're moving people. Human trafficking. Spectre felt a cold fury settle in his gut. And the woman? He pressed. Where is she now? That, I don't know. But I hear she's still alive. For now. Los Scorpions, they like to use people before they discard them. Reyes's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Spectre pushed a thick envelope across the table. That's half. The other half when I have a location. Reyes snatched the envelope, his fingers fumbling with the clasp. Locations are hard to come by these days, gringo. Los Scorpions, they don't share. Then you'll have to work harder, Spectre said, his voice flat and dangerous. He stood up, his shadow looming over Reyes. Because I'm coming for her. And anyone who gets in my way will regret it. He turned and walked out of the cantina, the neon sign buzzing mockingly behind him. The desert wind felt colder now, laced with the promise of violence. He had crossed the line. There was no going back. He was Spectre, and he was hunting whispers of the Scorpion. Diesel fumes and the cloying sweetness of roasting corn choked the air. Spectre, once known as Chuck, navigated the labyrinthine backstreets of Nuevo Laredo. The sinking sun stretched grotesque shadows that mimicked the city's desperate denizens, their meeting place. A dilapidated cantina, its name erased by time and neglect from the facade. Inside, the atmosphere was a pungent brew of stale beer, low-grade tequila, and unspoken truths. He found her in a dim alcove, a solitary figure in the sparsely populated bar. Isabella Isa Flores. Years had passed since he'd turned. His back on that life, her face was thinner, harder, mirroring the weariness that clung to him like a second skin. But the embers of defiance still flickered in her eyes, a sharp intelligence that cut through deception. He slid into the booth across from her, the aged leather groaning in protest. "Essay," he greeted, his voice a deep resonance, an eyebrow arched, perfectly sculpted. Charlie Dot or a different moniker these days? Her gaze scrutinized him, noting the subtle shifts, the cold edge in his gaze that hadn't been present before. You've transformed. Things evolve, he replied, his gaze unwavering. I require your assistance. Isa took a swig of her beer. Indeed they do, and what compels you to believe I'd offer it after all this time? After your vanishing act? Because I know your nature, Isa. Your sense of justice, however twisted, remains. A mirthless smile played on her lips. Justice? In this place, only survival matters. She paused, leaning closer, her voice a hushed confidence. But you're correct. I'm indebted to Elena. She mended me well after that. Disagreement with the Zetas, the finest damn nurse in this forsaken town. Los Scorpions seized her. Chuck stated, his jaw hardening. I need to know why. Isa sighed, a sound burdened with fatalism. She learned too much. They're operating a shadow industry, trafficking humans alongside their standard drug runs. Elena stumbled across something, a document, perhaps an overheard exchange. They silenced her. He recalled Elena's gentle touch, her unwavering commitment. Familiar rage, icy and pointed, surged within him. Where is she being held? They're safeguarding her closely, Isa answered, her eyes darting nervously. At Vabora's private estate. It's virtually impenetrable. He already knew the moniker El Vabora, the Viper, the man whose greed and brutality had contaminated everything he touched. Why that location? Sa hesitated, then took another gulp of her beer. Vabora. He suffered grievous wounds weeks ago. A rival faction attacked him fiercely. Rumor has it he barely clung to life. Elena is prolonging his existence. A memory surfaced, a stark contrast to the current bleakness. He was tending to Sa's wounded arm in a squalid haven. The air thick with antiseptic and dread. Sa, usually so collected, trembled. You saved my skin, Charlie, she'd confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I won't forget that. He'd simply nodded, strategizing their next action. He had been proficient in those days. Efficient. Lethal. She's a healer, not a conjurer, Chuck asserted, his tone dangerously quiet. Vabora is a blight. He doesn't merit her care. Deserves have nothing to do with it, Isa retorted, her voice tight. She's being compelled. They'll eradicate her the instant he's capable of issuing the order. She reached into her bag and slid a crumpled scrap across the table. A rudimentary diagram of the estate. Outdated, yet the best I could procure. Chuck examined the layout, his mind already deconstructing it, pinpointing vulnerabilities, calculating trajectories. Guard count. Excessive, Isa said, shaking her head. He's consumed by paranoia, and he has justifiable cause. I require more than a schematic, Chuck pressed, his gaze locking with hers. I need internal knowledge, schedules, weak spots, anything. Sa hesitated, her gaze sweeping the cantina. That sort of intelligence carries a cost. Specify it. She met his gaze, her expression inscrutable. I demand a pledge, Charlie. If you reach Vabora, ensure it's swift and no tortured and no games. Simply conclude it. He deserves torment. Yet he doesn't merit wielding the power he holds over so many like some cruel god that he must cease to be. Chuck weighed her words, the unspoken plea in her eyes. He knew Sa's heart. She wasn't advocating clemency for Vabora. She was seeking deliverance for those he oppressed, an end to the unending cycle of violence and grief. I pledge it, he affirmed, his voice a somber commitment. The words lingered, heavy with the burden of his history and the promise of a crimson future. The hammer falls. The air, thick with the reek of exhaust and sun-baked earth, vibrated against Chuck's skin from the ridge. He surveyed the cartel outpost, a collection of shacks, leaching onto the arid landscape. It wasn't Vabora's main redoubt, merely a staging area, a haven for his thugs, but its fall would resonate at a warning shot. He ran a final check on his arsenal. The silenced pistol, a dark promise nestled in its holster. The combat knife, a glint of steel strapped to his leg, and the AR-15, cradled across his chest like a sleeping beast. Spectre had risen from the ashes of buried memories. The assault was a precision cut. He flowed through the perimeter, silent as dust devils, a phantom menace. The first sentry never knew what struck him. A swift, decisive slice, and he slumped to the parched ground. The second, jolted by the muffled sound, spun around, his eyes widening with dawning horror as Chuck materialized from the gloom. A short, violent staccato from the AR-15 erased his surprise. Pandemonium seized the compound. Men groped for weapons, their shouts a discordant blend of terror and rage. Chuck became a force of nature, a whirlwind of calculated violence. He exploited the terrain, finding sanctuary behind fuel drums, melting into the shadows. Each shot found its mark. Each movement was economical, lethal. He wasn't simply killing. He was dismantling the cartel's infrastructure, excising their malignant growth. The din of gunfire assaulted the ears, the air saturated with the sharp tang of gunpowder and the metallic scent of spilled blood. Men crumpled, shrieking, clawing at wounds that offered no reprieve. The conflict was savage, desperate, yet fleeting within moments, and eerie. Quiet descended, broken only by the crackling dance of flames consuming a shack and the death rattles of the wounded. Chuck moved among the fallen, confirming their demise with grim efficiency. He gathered his spoils. Ammunition, medical supplies, and a beat-up pickup, its fuel tank miraculously full. He left a message carved into the earth with his knife, a single stark epithet. Spectre, let Vibora tremble. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Within the estate's imposing walls, a fragile hope flickered within Elena, cutting through her despair. The guard stationed outside her door was a fresh face, callow and visibly anxious. His gaze darted nervously around the courtyard, his attention fractured. This was a thread, perhaps her only one. 4 days. She had surreptitiously tested the cell's lock, employing a hairpin salvaged from oblivion. It was a clumsy tool, but promising. Now, she inserted the makeshift pick into the lock's mechanism. Her hands slick with perspiration, she subtly coaxed the tumblers. Click. The tumblers released. She eased the door ajar, peering into the vacant hallway, empty. After a deep breath, she stole out, moving with deliberate quiet down the passage. She possessed an intimate understanding of the house's architecture, knew the most efficient path to freedom beyond the outer walls. She reached the kitchen. Her hopes pinned on finding a weapon, anything that could inflict harm. An iron skillet, heavy and formidable, rested on the stovetop. It would have to suffice. Clutching it tightly, her pulse hammered in her ears. As she approached the back exit, she overheard voices approaching. Point 2 guards, chuckling, their words blurred by intoxication. They were too close. She sought refuge behind a pile of crates, her lungs refusing to breathe. They ambled past, completely unaware of her presence. She waited until they were safely out of sight, then slipped into the courtyard. The walls towered over her, impassable. She scanned the enclosure, desperately seeking a vulnerability, an avenue to escape. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. In his lavishly adorned office, Vibora stalked like a restless predator. News of the outpost's destruction had unleashed his fury. Spectre. The name was a bitter taste on his tongue. He had heard spectral tales, whispers of a wraith dismantling his enterprise piece by piece. He had dismissed them as folklore, the superstitions of frightened laborers. Now, the whispers had become a thunderous roar. "Find him!" he bellowed at Marco, his mountainous enforcer, known throughout the region as El Martillo the Hammer. "Locate this specter and deliver his head to me. Inflict suffering upon him until he begs for death." El Martillo's face split into a predatory grin, his eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. "As you command, Patron. The breaking of him will be enjoyable." He cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing through the room like snapping bone. "He will serve as a warning." Vibora watched him depart, a flicker of apprehension betraying his composure. He harbored no trust for anyone, not even his most dependable executioner. But Spectre posed a threat that demanded immediate action, and El Martillo was the perfect instrument for the task. Ruthless, savage, and utterly disposable. "Find him," he murmured to himself, "before he finds me." Desert duel. Heat waves distorted the horizon, painting a false promise of water onto the parched landscape. Spectre, once known as Chuck, was a shadow among shadows. His dark attire swallowed by the meager shade of the Joshua trees. Martillo was out there, a bloodhound on the scent of a wounded animal. The destroyed outpost wasn't just a warning. It was a snare. Spectre halted, his gaze sweeping the arid expanse. He lowered himself, the sharp grains abrading his skin. A faint, metallic whisper rode the breeze, the ghost of gunpowder. Martillo was a blunt instrument, not a scalpel that he was likely relying on. The same rudimentary method Spectre had long since discarded: snapped branches, displaced earth, a cast-off cigarette. He retraced his steps, deliberately scuffing the terrain in a wide loop. Let Martillo believe he was panicked, scattering. Let him underestimate the honed predator he'd become. A bestial roar shattered the silence. Lead tore through the air, throwing up plumes of sand scant inches from Spectre. He dived for cover behind a jumble of boulders, the stinging reek of cordite flooding his senses. Martillo was dangerously close. "Come out, Spectre!" Martillo's voice echoed, a booming threat laced with venom. "Let's see if you're made of iron like you think." Silence was his answer. Spectre wormed his way through the rocks, angling to outflank Martillo. He could hear the man crashing through the scrub, fueled by impatience and bloodlust. Martillo was a charging rhino. Spectre, a sidewinder coiled, ready to strike. He caught sight of Martillo, a massive silhouette outlined by the pitiless sun. The man fumbled with his weapon, reloading, his features twisted into a snarl. Spectre leveled his pistol, his grip unwavering. A single shot cracked the air. Martillo bellowed, clutching at his shoulder. The bullet had torn through muscle and sinew, but it hadn't felled him. He whirled around, firing wildly. Spectre dropped low again, lead whining past his ears. "Think you can hide, coward?" Martillo roared, his tone thick with pain-laced fury. "I'll rip you apart limb from limb." Spectre couldn't remain pinned. He needed mobility. To exploit the terrain, he flicked a glance at the sun, gauging its angle. An idea sparked, desperate, but his only play, elsewhere, within the oppressive walls of Vabora's hacienda. Elena remained kneeling on the gritty floor. Her wrists bound, her face bore the marks of violence, a split lip staining her skin. The failed attempt to escape had earned Vabora's full displeasure. "You disappoint me, me infirmera," Vabora purred, circling her like a jungle cat. "I overestimated your intelligence." Elena met his gaze, defiance hardening her features. "I'd sooner embrace death than remain your captive," she spat out. Vabora emitted a low chuckle, a chilling sound that vibrated through her. "Death is a release. I have other designs for you. Designs intended to crush your spirit, to shatter your resolve." He nodded to two guards who hauled a heavy chain into the chamber. One end connected to a sturdy metal ring sunk into the floor. The other, Elena gasped, comprehension dawning. He intended to shackle her like livestock. Back in the desert, Spectre had gained the high ground, perched atop a craggy ridge overlooking Martillo. The sun blazed directly at his back, blinding anyone looking up. He inhaled deeply, centering himself. He fired again, targeting Martillo's legs. The bullet struck home, eliciting a primal scream as Martillo crashed to the earth. "You think you've won?" Martillo choked, agony tightening his voice. "Vabora will hunt you to the ends of the earth. He'll make you suffer beyond imagining." Spectre offered no reply. He knew Vabora wouldn't cease his pursuit until he was silenced. But for now, his priority was elsewhere. He had to reach Elena before Vabora enacted his twisted plans. He descended the ridge, approaching Martillo with wary steps. He needed information. He needed to know Elena's location. "Where is she?" Spectre demanded, his voice a chilling monotone. Martillo coughed out a laugh, a wet, agonizing sound. "Never. I'll take my secrets to the grave." Spectre knelt, his face a breath away from Martillo's. "You're already halfway there," he murmured, "but I can expedite the process." He drew his blade, the polished steel flashing in the searing light. "Tell me where she is, and I vow to make your departure swift." Martillo stared up at him, eyes locked in a contest of hatred and stark terror. The desert wind keened around them, a mournful lament for a dying enforcer. The sun, a merciless eye in the sky, scorched the sand and turned the rocks into fiery embers. The desert remained apathetic, an indifferent witness to the brutal ballet of life and death unfolding beneath its vast, unforgiving expanse, into the scorpion's nest. The desert wind howled a mournful dirge around Martillo, each gust a chilling reminder of his impending death. Chuck knelt beside him, the red sand swirling around them like a macabre dance. Martillo's breath rattled in his chest, a gruesome counterpoint to the wind. "Vibora will not avenge me," he rasped, his eyes burning with feverish defiance. Chuck pressed a gloved hand harder on the wound, silencing the boasts. "He won't even remember your name by sunrise. Tell me where Elena is." Martillo spat a mouthful of blood. "Never." Chuck's face remained impassive, a mask honed from years of burying emotion. He withdrew a combat knife, its polished surface glinting in the starlight. Martillo flinched, his bravado finally crumbling. "Please! Where is she?" Chuck's voice was low, devoid of inflection, but laced with a threat that chilled Martillo to the bone. He choked out the coordinates, a series of numbers that meant nothing to anyone but those who lived in the shadow of the Scorpion. The hacienda. The main compound at a fortress. Chuck released the pressure on the wound. Martillo gasped, a pathetic, ragged sound. Chuck stood and walked away, leaving him to bleed out under the uncaring stars. He wouldn't waste a bullet. Martillo had already used up his worth. The hacienda was a scar on the landscape, a cluster of buildings huddled behind a high concrete wall topped with razor wire. Floodlights illuminated the perimeter, turning the surrounding desert into a stark, unforgiving stage. Armed guards patrolled the walls, their silhouettes moving with practiced vigilance. This wasn't an outpost. This was the heart of the Scorpion's nest. Chuck parked the stolen SUV miles away, choosing to approach on foot. He moved like a ghost, melting into the shadows, using every dip and rise in the terrain for cover. The air crackled with tension, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the distant hum of generators and the crunch of his boots on the sand. He wore black tactical gear, blending seamlessly with the night. A thermal scope gave him an edge, painting the guards in ghostly white outlines against the cool blue of the desert. The first challenge was the wall. The main gate was out of the question, heavily guarded and likely rigged with explosives. He opted for a less obvious approach, a section of the wall that abutted a dry wash. He used a grappling hook and rope, scaling the concrete with practiced ease, his movements fluid and silent. Once over the wall, he found himself in a service area, a labyrinth of pipes and conduits that ran along the inner perimeter. The air here was thick with the smell of diesel and stale grease. He moved quickly, hugging the shadows, his senses on high alert. He disabled the first camera with a well-placed shot. From a silenced pistol, the glass shattering silently. The second camera required a more delicate touch. He used a small EMP device, frying its circuits without alerting the guards as he rounded a corner. He nearly collided with a man in a priest's collar. The man gasped, his eyes widening in surprise. "Madre de Dios! Who are you?" Chuck froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. "I'm looking for Elena." The priest's gaze softened. He was older, his face etched with worry, but his eyes held a spark of resilience. "I am Padre Benicio. I know of Elena. Vibora has her. Come with me, quickly." Padre Benicio led him through a maze of corridors, his footsteps surprisingly light for a man of his age. "Vibora has eyes everywhere," he whispered. "We must be careful." The padre explained that he worked within the compound, ministering to the workers and the families forced to live under Vibora's rule. He had seen Elena, knew she was being held in the main house. He also knew of a service tunnel, used for waste disposal, that led directly beneath the house. It was a risky route, but it was their only chance. "It will be unpleasant," Padre Benicio warned, his face grim, "but it is the only way to get you close to her unnoticed." Chuck nodded, his resolve hardening. He had waded through worse. He was ready to descend into the Scorpion's bowels, gratitude and war. The tunnel air, heavy with the stench of mildewed earth and a biting tang like spent cartridges, clung to Chuck's throat. Padre Benicio halted before a massive wooden door, its surface a palimpsest of violence. "Beyond lies the serpent's lair," He breathed, his hand sketching a cross in the air. May God guide you, son. Chuck's nod was curt, tension etched on his face. He gripped the frigid iron handle, inhaled deeply, and thrust the door inward. Elena was there, in a confined, austere room, bound to a chair. Her face bore the marks of abuse, yet defiance blazed in her gaze. "Charlie?" she rasped, surprise mingling with a fragile bloom of hope. "Elena?" he replied, his voice thick with unshed tears. He crossed the space in heartbeats, his fingers working frantically at the coarse ropes that bit into her skin. A voice, gravelly and laced with malice, sliced through the silence. "Well now. Look what slithered in or should I say, what the padre unwittingly ushered through the drain." Elva Bora filled the doorway, his lips peeled back in a predatory grin. Behind him, two thugs brandished their weapons. Elena's breath hitched, fear momentarily eclipsing the light in her eyes. "Charlie, get back!" Ignoring her plea, Chuck kept his focus laser-locked on Elva Bora. He severed the last rope and hauled Elena to her feet, positioning his body as a shield. "This ends tonight, Ricardo." "Ends? This is merely the overture, Spectre." Elva Bora sneered, spitting the moniker like poison. "You deluded yourself into thinking you could stroll in and reclaim what's mine. A grave miscalculation." He flicked his hand towards his men. "Obliterate them." The room exploded. Chuck shoved Elena behind a hulking armoire, diving for cover behind an overturned table. Projectiles tore through the air, puncturing the plaster with violent reports. He returned the volley, his actions calibrated and lethal. Point one of Elva Bora's enforcers pitched forward, a dark bloom blossoming on his chest. The other scrambled for concealment behind the doorjamb. "Elena! Get out!" Chuck bellowed over the din, his shots sending showers of wood shrapnel. "Back to the tunnel. Benicio will aid you." "I won't leave you," she screamed back, scrabbling for a fallen pistol. "You have to. I can't safeguard you if you stay here." Elena hesitated, her eyes pools of raw distress. Then, a spark of resolve ignited within her. She snatched the weapon and bolted for the tunnel, vanishing into the inky blackness. Chuck knew he'd bought her mere seconds. He reloaded, his senses razor-sharp, adrenaline surging through his veins. He erupted from behind the table, firing on the move, striking Elva Bora's remaining man in the leg. The man shrieked, crumpling to the ground, clutching his ruined limb. Dead Elva Bora, his face a mask of fury, drew a gold-plated pistol. "You will suffer for this, Spectre. You will atone for everything." Chuck offered no retort as he advanced, his gaze riveted to Elva Bora, his mind a tempest of vengeance and the desperate need to safeguard the woman he'd failed before. The two men circled. A macabre waltz of hunter and hunted. Elva Bora unleashed a shot, the bullet whistling past Chuck's temple. Chuck responded in kind, striking Elva Bora in the shoulder. He staggered, unleashing a torrent of curses, closing the gap. Chuck swatted the pistol from Elva Bora's grasp. A savage, desperate melee erupted. Blows rained down, each strike fueled by a reservoir of hatred and desperation. Elva Bora, weakened by the bullet wound, couldn't match Chuck's brute strength and skill. Chuck disarmed him and delivered a bone-jarring blow to his jaw, sending him sprawling. He stood above Elva Bora, his chest heaving, his knuckles throbbing. He raised his fist, poised to deliver the final, crushing blow. But then, Elena's face flashed in his mind, her silent plea for him to reclaim his soul. His hand wavered, the rage slowly ebbing. Supplanted by a profound exhaustion, he lowered his fist. "It's finished, Ricardo." Turning his back, he walked away, leaving Elva Bora wallowing in defeat. The cacophony of chaos still reverberated through the hacienda, but Chuck no longer registered it. His sole focus was finding Elena and extracting her from this hellhole. He found her waiting for him at the tunnel's mouth. Her face drained but determined, Padre Benicio stood sentinel beside her, his eyes clouded with apprehension. "Let's leave," Chuck stated, grasping Elena's hand. They retreated into the tunnel, leaving the skeletal remains of Elva Bora's empire behind them. Days later, they stood on a beach in a tranquil coastal town, a world away from the violence and rot of Mexico. The sun blazed down, warming their faces. Waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, a soothing balm that appeared to wash away the lingering traces of the nightmare they had endured. Elena faced Chuck, her eyes brimming with gratitude and fragile expectation. "What now, Charlie?" He scrutinized her, seeing the wounds she carried, both visible and unseen. He witnessed the fortitude in her eyes, the resilience that had enabled her to survive, and he knew, with unwavering conviction, what his path was. "Now," he said, intertwining his fingers with hers, "we begin anew. Did I swear to you, Elena, I will safeguard you always." The road ahead would be arduous and challenging, but they would navigate it together. They had weathered the storm of war, and now they would construct a new existence, forged in the crucible of gratitude and the cinders of the past.